Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Claudia Roden, Senior Curator and Culture Lead at Community Jameel, an independent and global organization advancing science and learning for communities to thrive. This conversation, entitled Cooking to Save Your Life, is part of the Community Jameel afikra COP28 Conversations. In this episode, we embark on a captivating journey into the intricate interplay of food, culture, history, and migration within the context of a rapidly changing world facing numerous challenges, including climate change. Our aim is to explore how these elements are interconnected and the myriad ways they impact communities and individuals globally. It will delve into how food can foster resilience and social inclusion, alongside potential policy changes to help communities thrive.
Thank you very much, Clea. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Halal Masri, Programs Officer at Community Jameel, and I'm absolutely delighted and honored to introduce our guests for today's conversation, Claudia Roden and Professor Abhijit Banerjee. Claudia Roden, you are a cultural anthropologist and a celebrated food writer known for your exploration of global culinary traditions. You were also born in Cairo, Egypt, and your quest to reconnect with your own cultural roots through food led you to collecting recipes and igniting a lifelong passion for culinary exploration and storytelling. Your seminal work, A Book of Middle Eastern Food, that was published in 1968, absolutely revolutionized Western perceptions of Middle Eastern and North African cuisines. We also have with us today Professor Abhijit Banerjee. Born in India, you are a professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In 2003, you co-founded the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, also known as J-PAL, alongside Esther Duflo and Sandil Mulaynathan. And in 2019, you were awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. Throughout your career, you also authored numerous articles and books, including but obviously not limited to Poor Economics, co-authored with Esther Duflo, and Cooking to Save Your Life, which sounds familiar as it is both the title and the inspiration behind today's conversation. So thank you both for being here with us today. And this also leads me into my first question for you both. Could you share how your personal connection with food intertwines with your cultural heritage?
I'm a Jew from Arab lands, now called Mizrahi. Three of my grandparents moved from Aleppo to Cairo at the end of the 19th century, when the building of the Suez Canal ended the place of Aleppo as the hub on the camel caravan trade routes from the east. They were merchants, families. They settled in a quarter of Cairo called Sakakini, inhabited mainly by Syrian families. And they continued to live and to cook as if they were in Syria. On my maternal grandmother's side, she was from Istanbul. So this is the food of my childhood. I started collecting recipes from family and friends in 1956, when the Jews left Egypt in a hurry after the Suez Crisis. As a result of the war with Israel, there'd been no cookbooks. I became fascinated with the recipes and the stories and history behind them. It resulted in my fascination with the culture I shared with the Muslim world we were part of, and discovery of who we were.
I'm Abhijit Banerjee. I grew up in India, very much in a culture where eating was kind of central. We would, and this was not just our family, it was every family I knew we would spend infinite time talking about food. And it was at a time when food was actually quite scarce, and people, even middle-class people like us, really felt the pinch. But there was a lot of talk about how to finesse that, how to get something good, even if you couldn't afford much. And in that, so growing up in that culture, I don't think I would have escaped sort of being obsessed with food. But I grew up also in a household where my mother was a kind of prominent feminist person, and so I learned from an early age that if I wanted to eat something good, I have to make it myself. And then I eventually migrated to the US, and There's a lot of pull of nostalgia and maybe also a desire to find a cultural formation of my own. And all of that inspired me to, cook and write cookbooks.
How has your experience of migration influenced your approach to cooking? And how do you believe food can foster inclusivity in diverse societies?
Yes. Well, first of all, from my home in Egypt, we had a cook, and my mother had taught the cook how to cook our kind of food. Entertaining was part of our life. This is what we were. What we spent our time doing was visiting or entertaining. This is where I really enjoyed the making of food, because I was given tiny little tasks to do. But when I came to London to study art, it was a shock, a cultural shock, because here the food was awful, horrible. People allow me to say it. They even keep roping me in to say it again and again, because now, of course, London is a great capital of food, culinary capital. But it was horrible. So I was sharing a flat with my two brothers. My elder brother was at medical school, my younger brother still at school at the French lycée. And I was cooking for them, and I was cooking for our friends, because our friends took to coming to my house. And I started making the stuffed vegetable, the stuffed vine leaves, the phyllo, all the things that actually I miss terribly, because one does miss home. And to me, I did miss home a lot. And I became very popular just from cooking those things. But I think one doesn't realize the great longing and missing of home. And for me, I think at that time I missed home, I missed my parents, but nothing compares to when we had to leave Egypt and we thought forever. And for me then, it was a terrible, terrible longing. And part of the longing then became collecting recipes. And perhaps this is what, for me, has led to my whole career.
In some ways, the echoes of that, of what Claudia said in my life. I came to the US, and I came from, as I said, a very food-obsessed culture. And the thing that was remarkable in the US was not just that the food was bad, it was awful. So I was so appalled by the whole thing that I tried to organize a cooking group. And I realized after a little while that if I did a little extra cooking, that wouldn't hurt, because I had to eat it as well. So it was, but we would try to cook. And it was, I wasn't particularly good, but I think everyone else hadn't even imagined this activity. And so it was an interesting moment. And it stayed with me in the sense that I really find that the community bonds, the friends we made in that process have stayed with me, many of them. And it meant cooking is just a language also. It's a way to be excited, it's to share things, to get excited about things. And I think it has become a part of my conversation and way of being in the world.
I have to say that for me, because there had been no cookbooks at all in Egypt, I had never seen a recipe printed anywhere in a magazine or a paper. And then suddenly I just felt, what are we going to do? We have nothing. And so this idea that a recipe is not just a recipe, that it has background, it has stories, it has history, it's part of a great culture, it means something. For me, that became the reason why I wrote what I wrote and the way I wrote.
I also have a question to you, Claudia, in specific. So your extensive exploration of culinary tradition spans various cultures. Can you recount an anecdote that illustrates how food can act as a cultural bridge?
I was still in my 40s when my children all left on the same day to go to university. But for me, I decided I wouldn't stay at home for another day. I would leave too, and I left on the same day to travel around the Mediterranean because I missed the Mediterranean. In Egypt at the time, it was a cosmopolitan country where French was a lingua franca. And so we spoke French at home. I also spoke Italian with a nanny, and because Italian was one of the languages. And I could speak a bit of Arabic, or at least I could understand it all. And also a bit of Judeo-Spanish. So I could go to Spain and just research without ever needing a translator. And so I did start my research in Morocco. So I started traveling around to discover what are dishes that chefs could do in Egypt and why. But so I really felt the joy of traveling there and rediscovering an Egypt that I never really knew because I was so protected. And so with this freedom, but I did find it in Lebanon, I found it in Morocco, and Turkey is now like my new home because of all the connections I've got there. And it was actually the case in Italy where I researched the regional foods. So I can say really food, but also the eating together, the conviviality, the joy of being around the table with another person or with a group of people is something quite unique and something that creates a bond. And that is a bond that is so special that I don't see any other kind of experience that creates that kind of bond.
Professor Banerjee, reflecting on your discussion in the Times of India about energy efficient cooking, could you elaborate on its significance within sustainable culinary practices?
You know, I want to connect it to something else to start with. I think one thing we underestimate is how important constraints are. The constraints, we sort of, I think often we get this narrative that, we just want everything. And I go to restaurants, expensive restaurants especially, but I feel a little annoyed that there is this, this caviar I put on top, but it really doesn't serve a food function. It's really just a gesture. There are too many gestures. And I feel that one of the things I grew up with, and I feel I really was privileged to have grown up with, was a sense of constraints, that people didn't have money, they didn't have time, they didn't have energy, and they were trying to be inventive. And the inventiveness that generates, and I've seen this, I work with the poor, on the poor. It's the gesture of sharing that sort of, again, it's the imagination. I have to give something special. I have to do something different, and I can't just do it. Just give them a glass of water. I want to give them something different, and that thinking. And when you have nothing, you just take some corn that you have at home and you break it and you put it with water and you make a drink with it. I find that unusually touching when that happens. And when I was writing about energy efficient cooking, part of what I was trying to say is we thought of it as a celebration. So you have one small burner and you have to cook everything on it. But it creates a cuisine. It's a particular way of cooking, which I think is what I was trying to celebrate, is that fact that this is not sort of a narrative of plenty is great. It's a narrative of inventiveness comes from constraints, and I'm a big believer in it. In that sense, I don't want us to be downbeat about being, in this energy challenged world where we're using too much energy. I think we should be celebrating it. We should be creative. It's an opportunity to do things better.
Last but not least, given the collaborative effort between Community Jameel and Afikra to actively engage young audiences, would you like to convey a message to youth in the Middle East, Southern Asia, and the Global South, drawing from your teachings and obviously shared experiences?
So I would tell everybody to learn to cook, or just to cook. And it's easy when you trust your taste. You just do. You can't do anything too wrong except burning it completely. But otherwise, it's fine. And if it tastes good to you, then it's good. And really be curious. Be curious about foods of others. You enjoy the foods, cook them. It will bring you close to the others. It will make you understand them. But value your own traditions. You can be modernized. You can modernize them. You can tweak, of course, but do not throw them away. They are who you are and what others appreciate from you.
I called the book I wrote Cooking to Save Your Life, not because it would actually save your life, but because there is this expression in English that I can't cook to save my life. And the joke was everyone can cook to save their own lives, and I think there is a mystification, and often recipes are not written like Claudia's, which are wonderfully sort of down to earth exposition. They're often extra ingredients that may or may not be that useful thrown in to make it more complicated and elaborate. If somebody tells you to cut onions fine, what does that mean? How do you translate it into? So I use like the thickness of your earlobe as a measure, for example. Just something you have at hand, not something that somebody bring a scale into the kitchen. So just thinking about the reality of people's lives and trying to write a cookbook that lives in people's lives. And the point was exactly to demystify. And the thing that I would say is that I think it's great to be sort of ambitious. You try to do very elaborate things, but I think the great pleasure is that miracle of something incredibly simple. The thing I would like to say is it's great to be a foodie, great to be inspired by complicated recipes, but I think in the end, also to taste what you're eating, to try to see, why am I putting this ingredient? What do I taste in the food? So I would say that be excited by your own cooking. If something tastes good to you, it is good. There is no other standard to meet.
This was Cooking to Save Your Life by Claudia Roden and Helal Masri. Thank you very much to our guests, Claudia Roden and Professor Abhijit Banerjee, for this grand finale of the Community Jameel afikra COP28 Conversations series. You can find their books in any good bookshop around the world. Christmas is coming. A book of Middle Eastern food and Cooking to Save Your Life are your best bets to shine. Happy holiday season to all, and thank you very much.